All right, so I think we are live today on Facebook, which is very exciting. So we're just going to hang on for a few minutes and let a few people, get themselves organized and logged in. But welcome to everybody who has logged in so far. And I see Gwen. Hi, Gwen. How are you? Thanks for coming. And so it is a beautiful day outside. I hope it's a beautiful day where you are. It's a beautiful day where I am. So that is great. And it is also very exciting because it is National Embroidery Month, which is great. So we're going to talk a lot about embroidery today and what you need to get started. So that's going to be very cool. All right. So just want to, again, to welcome everybody for coming today and listening to what we're going to talk about, which is basically going to be introduction to machine embroidery. So we will talk a little bit about needles and what you need in the needle field. We are going to talk about threads. We're going to talk about stabilizers because those are all important ingredients to get you started with embroidery. We will also show you, or I will also show you how to hoop. We have several different hoops that I'm going to use today to share. And I'm also going to talk about our new entry level, the Husqvarna, our new entry level machine, embroidery machine, which is the Husqvarna Viking Designer Quartz 29. So I'm just going to zip over to that camera and just share a couple of things about it. And then we're going to come back at the end towards the end of the presentation and talk a little bit more. So here is the Designer Quartz 29, as I mentioned. Oh, we'll just zoom out a little bit so you can see it more. There we go. So this is the Designer Quartz 29. It's the entry-level embroidery machine, and it is a fabulous machine. It's small. Now, for those people that have some of our larger machines, you go, oh my gosh, like it really is small. But what this is great for is if you are new to embroidery, it's great because it's in a nice budget point, but it's also a great traveling machine. So if you're going to go to an embroidery class, you know, you're tired of taking your great big embroidery machine with you, guess what? You can take the Designer Quartz 29 with you. Yes, it doesn't have the same hoop size that you will have with the other ones, but it's a great way to be part of that class. And it is an embroidery as well as a sewing machine. So that's really nice about it. So if you're just going to do a little bit of embroidery, you can use it. And then otherwise you can use it as a sewing machine. So we're going to come back later and have a peek at some of the features that you can do on that machine. But let's go back now and we are going to talk about thread. All right. So I'm just going to put some thread up here so we can have something to look at instead of my blank screen. So when we are talking about thread for machine embroidery, all right, of course it doesn't want to, there we go. All right. So when we're talking about thread for machine embroidery, this industry standard for thread is to use a 40 weight thread. Okay. That is the industry standard. Now, a lot of times people, when you're buying a thread, you know, I really have no idea, thread weight or anything like that. The thread weight is usually indicated on the size of, on the side of the spool. Here we can see, I just turn that a little bit. There is a 40 right there. That tells us it's a 40 weight thread. This one here has the weight on the bottom of it. So usually somewhere on that label, it will, whoops, I put it right under the camera so you can see that. Okay, so there, the weight is usually indicated on the spool in some way or form. Now, you also, as you start to work with a particular brand of thread that's in your local dealer, then you'll know that that is the thread that you're going to be using. Now, the reason that I'm showing you these different spools is because spool sizes is because you are going to walk into the store and you're going to say, well, which one should I buy? So I like to buy these large spools for the colors that I am going to use a lot of. So black, white, if I use a lot of red or brown or blue, whatever that color is, I like to buy these giant spools so then I'm not always, I'm not going to run out of that particular color. Now, if it is a color that I'm going to use somewhat frequently, like maybe Christmas reds, Christmas greens, and so on, or blues, yellows, at least one of every primary color, or the main colors, I'm going to say rainbow colors, that's probably a better way of saying it, I will want to buy this size of a spool. But if it's an odd color that I'm really only going to use once in a while, then I will buy these smaller spools. So when I look at my spool boxes, they are a mishmash of sizes. And I also use a variety of brands. I really go for the color. That's kind of what my thing is I look at the color and then I buy according to how frequently I think I'm going to be using that particular thread. So 40 weight is the industry standard, but you will also find that you can embroider with other weights of thread. So here is a 30 weight, and the weight again is indicated right down there. You can see, whoops, I just have to get used to this camera, just 1 second. So there is the 30, you can see that down there. So if I'm working with a design that's a little bit not quite as dense, or I want a denser coverage, then I would use a 30 weight thread. So just keep that in mind. Now, I want to share something with you when we talk about the weight. So here is a little sample. I have to say I am all about making samples. They are so much fun, and I've learned so much by doing it. We're just going to zoom in just a little bit here and have a look at this. So the 40, this was a design that I created in the MySewnet embroidery software. It was just letters, numbers, and this was stitched out with a 40 weight thread. Okay. The 30 was stitched out with a 30 weight thread. Now it might be a little hard for you to see on the camera, but this one is a lot denser in design. So it's actually a little bit thicker. When I go to touch it, it's thicker than this one, than the 40 weight is. So, which is great. This is the sort of thing that you need to do so that instead of you running to your dealer all the time and saying, I don't know what this is all about, can you help me? Is you've already done this work. And this is done with a 60 weight thread. So what happens with the thread weights is as the number gets smaller, so 30 is smaller than 40, as the number gets smaller, the thread weight gets thicker. Okay, so the higher the number, the thinner the thread. So you can see the lack of coverage using this thinner thread here. Okay. All right, so thread weight is important. And also the type of thread is important. So here's another little sample that I've done. And we'll just zoom out this way. So this one here has been done using a cotton thread, a polyester thread, and a rayon thread, because those are the types of thread that we can embroider with. The industry standard is to use polyester or rayon, but I could also embroider with cotton. I could basically embroider with anything my machine will handle, but these are the common ones that you would be using. Okay. Now, what you have to be careful about is that the rayon thread, if you're going to make something that you know is going to be bleached, like children's clothing, let's say, you're making a quilt and it's going to be bleached. So you have to be careful because this is what will happen. Okay. So you see, there's my cotton. It is a little bit duller than what it was when I started. There's my polyester, and the color in the rayon actually bleached completely out. So you want to be really careful with that. I use rayon all the time, but most of the stuff that I make will never be bleached. It's not for children. So I don't have a problem to use the rayon thread. But if you know that it's going to be specifically for that purpose, you might want to just watch that. Okay. All right. Now, let's just talk quickly about bobbin threads. So you can buy bobbin weight thread. So the one thing I just, because again, we're in introduction to embroidery, but this is the industry standard thread, which is that 40 weight, and it's nice and shiny. You'd put it on the top, but I'm not going to put this in the bobbin. It's a little more expensive thread than what we have for bobbin weight thread, and I don't want it in the bobbin. So I would be using a bobbin weight thread, which could be anywhere from a 60 to 100 weight thread. You can wind your own bobbins like this. And usually bobbin weight thread will come in two colors, black and white, or you could purchase pre-wound bobbins. Now these pre-wound bobbins that I have here are for the Epic. That's the only ones that I have on hand, but they usually come in black and they come in white. And that's usually what you use. And the tension on your machine will be good enough that you don't have to worry about using any other multicolor threads in the bobbin. There is one exception, And that is if you are working with a design that is going to be two-sided. So this is a trivet, kind of like a rope bowl, but it's done with macrame cord. And it is a two-sided design. So this is the front and this is the back. So what I've done is I've actually put the same color of thread into the bobbin. So a 40 weight thread in the bobbin and a 40 weight thread in the top to compensate for having this look as nice on the back as it does on the front. Okay. All right. And one other thing about thread, this is just an example of something that I stitched out using that heavier 30 weight thread. And it almost looks like it has been stitched, hand stitched with like a wool thread. So it's very, very cool. All right. Okay. Any questions about thread? I know we have to go kind of quickly because we only have 60 minutes, but any questions about thread before we move on?
I don't see any questions yet, Elaine.
Okay, perfect. That means we're doing a good job. Thank you, Amy. Okay, and just for anyone who came in late, just to let you know that this is going to be recorded and you will be able to catch the entire thing on Facebook and YouTube the minute that we are finished. So, okay. So the next thing that we're going to talk about are needles. All right. So we have our Husqvarna branded needles. And there are lots of reasons to buy these. I'm not going to go into all of the reasons right now. What we are looking at, though, is an embroidery needle, and our embroidery needles will come in two sizes. So we have the 80/12 or 80/12. We have a 90/14. Now, the way that the numbering system on needles works is the opposite from the way thread weights work. You'd think they could make it all the same, but they don't. So the larger the number on the needle, the larger the needle. So the shaft is thicker, the eye is thicker. So if you're working with a 30 weight thread or something thicker than a 30 weight thread or heavier than a 30 weight thread, you would want to definitely be using this 90/14. If you're working with just your 40 weight industry standard thread on fabric or a garment, then you're quite fine to be using your 80/12 needles. Okay. Some of those needles you are able to get them in packages of 100 as well. So you would have to ask your dealer. These are not something that are usually carried, but you can get packages of 100 for some of the types of embroidery and sizes. I'm just off the top of my head. I don't remember which ones they are, but that is great to have. You can also get titanium embroidery needles. So these needles have been coated with titanium, which makes them last longer. Now, how much longer? I'm not able to give you that information. But what I like to do when I'm embroidering is I might use 4 bobbins, 5 bobbins, depends on the machine that I have, depends on what I'm working with. And then I will change my needle and I will clean out the bobbin case. So the titanium needles will last longer. So if you're used to using, let's say, 4 bobbins, maybe you can get away with 5 or 6 bobbins before you're going to need to change your needle. So just know that we also have the titanium embroidery needles in both sizes, the 80/12 and the 90/14. Okay. And then you can also buy an assortment pack, and this will give you a couple of different sizes in there. So if you're not sure, if you're new to embroidery and you're not sure where you want to go, you can always buy an assortment pack of embroidery needles. And even though this is introduction to embroidery, I will let you know that we have a twin embroidery needle. So yes, you can use a twin embroidery needle on your machine. This is a 2 millimeter. You'll just have to take into consideration the design that you are working with or the style, and also the stitch width on your machine. So something that if you haven't played with it, just know that you can get it, and it is an embroidery needle. Now, I'm just going to quickly mention this other type of needle. These are top stitch needles. So what will happen is there are times when what you are going through is so thick, or you're using a very thick thread that you're struggling with, and you're getting a lot of shredding. So I would then move to a top stitch needle because I can get a larger top stitch. I can get a 16/100. I have also the 14s and I have the 12s. So this is only if I'm really stuck and my embroidery 12 or 14 isn't working, then I would potentially look at a top stitch needle. Okay. Now, the one thing that I learned many years ago was when I bought my first embroidery machines, like over 25 years ago, my dealer at the time told me, he said that most of the issues that you are going to have with something not working on your machine is the incompatibility of your thread to your needle. And he was 100% right. So if it's the middle of the night and you are desperately trying to finish a project for tomorrow, as we almost always do, and thread is shredding or you've got breakage, look at your needle and look at your thread and go, do I have the right combination? Because that is usually changing one or the other will solve our problem. So it's a good idea to keep all of these in your arsenal as well as the embroidery needles, and then you're ready for anything that's going to happen in the middle of the night. But just make sure that, and there's a little indication up here for changing your needles, you need to change that needle on a regular basis. And if your needle hits a pin, that's an automatic, you have to change it. Okay. So that is what I have to say about needles. And Amy, how are we doing? Do we have any questions before we move on?
We do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to actually backtrack because some questions about thread came in.
Okay, perfect.
So, somebody is wondering if that sample that you showed that looked like it was almost hand embroidered, was that a wool thread, or what type of thread was in that design?
So this design was actually a cotton thread, but it was a thick thread. I believe it was a 28 weight thread. So it was quite thick. But this design was actually digitized for using a thick thread.
Cool.
You notice that it's quite loose. So it was digitized specifically for that. Yeah. Okay.
Excellent. Somebody also, let me look here. Somebody wanted to know, this is a needle question here. What kind of needles do they use in the factory when they're like, I'm guessing setting I think she's saying timing on the machine, or like calibrating things like needle threaders, etc. Do you have that information? Do you know?
You know, I believe, so obviously they're using the Husqvarna Viking needles. I believe they are using a universal, I'm going to say a size 12. I am kind of guessing at that, but that is the most common needle that you would be using. And all of our machines are either sewing and or embroidery. So they would be timing it, I would imagine, in sewing mode. So I'm guessing it will be a universal 12.
I think you're right on that one, Elaine. Yeah, that sounds right. Somebody would also like to know, are all of these needles compatible on the Quartz 29?
Okay, so all of the needles that I have shared will be compatible on the Quartz 29. The only one that I would just be careful of would be the twin needle. Now, the twin needle will work. You just have to be conscientious of the stitch width, but all of them should work. It will greatly depend on the design, especially when you're using a twin needle.
Awesome. And now I have a question that actually is going to sort of preempt what I think is coming up next. Somebody commented that the samples, the stitch out samples that you showed looked very dense and still looked very flat on that thin fabric that you used. So what she really wants to know, I think, is what kind of stabilizer did you use, and any hints to getting such dense stitching to look that nice on a fine fabric.
Okay, because as you can see here, because I have this fabric sitting on a dark table, and you can almost see a little bit of the dark shadowing through, but they are very, very flat. So absolutely, we are just going to pop over and talk about stabilizers now. So that was perfect segue into that. Okay. So, and before we do that, there's just one thing, and I'm just going to just hang on one second while I get myself organized here to share this with you. So the one thing that you can, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but we have the MySewnet app. Okay, so if I back out of here, this will take me to the MySewnet app, which you can see, whoops, you can see that right down here on my iPad. So I'm going to open that app up. Now, this app is free to anybody. You can go to your app, can run it on an Apple product or you can run it on an Android product. And you're going to go to the appropriate app store in order to get it. And it's free. All that's required is that you put your email address in and you put in a password. Okay. Now, when I go in here, I can go and open up my sewing assistant. And that sewing assistant is going to take me, in this case, I'm using the Designer Epic 3, but I could have used the Quartz 29 as well. I'm going to have the JoyOS Advisor. And within that JoyOS Advisor, there are numerous topics. So there's information about embroidering. So if you're looking for different techniques in embroidery, you can go into there. But I wanted to share needles. For instance, there is a topic on needles. And by selecting that, I now have various categories. I have utility, embroidery, heirloom, specialty, and so on. And if I open up the utility, there we go. So this will bring up information about the needles, and you can see that pop up on the screen, and there will be detailed information in there. So there's our titanium needles. We have top stitch needles, universal needles, and so on. So there is a lot of information that you can download on that app, and it's 100% free. And the other area, which is where we're going to go to now, is stabilizers. And so this will give us the 4 types of stabilizers, which I'm going to explain in a second. And you will then get more information about it. So if you said, I want to know more about cut or tear away, then these are some of the tear away products that we have. So a great resource to go and get free information so that when you do end up talking to your dealer or you go to a class, you're at least a little more knowledgeable and not going in with your eyes kind of, I have no idea what they're talking about. So a great place to go. And it is the MySewnet app. And you'll see that on your Android or your Apple Play Store. Okay, so now let's talk about stabilizers. So stabilizers are very important, and they are important whether you're in sewing mode, and they're definitely important when you're in embroidery. You just really can't embroider without a stabilizer. Now, the thing to keep in mind when you are looking at stabilizers is there are 4 main categories. And the way stabilizers are categorized is by how the stabilizer is removed from your project. Okay? It's how the stabilizer is removed from your project. It has not, it does have to do with your weight and type of fabric and so on, but the predominant way is how do you remove it? So the first one that we have is tearaway. And this is a piece of tearaway right here. And when this goes on to the back of my project and I'm finished embroidering, the way for me to remove it is to just literally tear it. Okay, so you see how I'm just tearing it? And that's how it will be removed from the project. And I have a little example here to show you. So that's just a nice little embroidery design. And if I open up the inside, you can see that some of that tearaway is remaining inside. Now, if I wanted, I could go in and pick out all of that stabilizer, but that's an awful lot of work. So in a lot of cases, if the design or the inside of the design or the back of the design is going to be contained within a quilt block, or it's going to be within a tote bag, or anything that will have a lining on it, we could potentially get away with using this tearaway stabilizer because it doesn't matter if it stays in. When this item gets washed, that stabilizer, because it's sort of paper-based, it will just start to disintegrate and it will remove itself. Okay, so that is what the tearaway will look like on the back in embroidery, and this one will tear away. Now, I just have one thing I want to share with you before we go to that one. So this is an embroidery design, and I think this is the same fabric that I had used to make those samples with the numbers on it. I put this in the hoop. Now, I knew this was going to happen. So I put this in the hoop. The design is quite dense, and I had no stabilizer. So you can see that it is really not very successful. I didn't even get to the point where I finished stitching it because I just knew it was going to be a mess. So I left it. So then I added 1 layer of tearaway underneath it. So this is the difference that 1 layer of tearaway makes. So I was able to finish the design. These pine cones are actually very, very dense. And this is a long and short stitch, this green. So it wants to pull in quite a bit. And there is a little bit of puckering up here. Not much, but a little bit of puckering, because again, this fabric that I'm working with is very, very fine. All right. So then the next step was to add a second layer of stabilizer underneath it. Again, these were all done with tearaway stabilizers, and it's come out pretty much right on the money. And I am going to show you how to hoop your stabilizers in various types of hoops as well, so that you'll get an appreciation for that. So these designs that were done with the lettering, these ones here, were done with tearaway stabilizer. And when I was finished, that tearaway was removed. And you probably can't see that on the camera. Oh, there's actually a little bit there. There's a little piece of the tearaway stuck at the top. I didn't pull it completely off. So the tearaway was there, but these stitches are so dense, it just perforated it and took it right off. Okay. So that is the tearaway stabilizer. Now I want to show you something that happens in sewing mode as well. So here is a sample of some stitching. And I was working on a project that required a hand stitch between the blocks, the quilt blocks that were sewn together. And I was like, I have a machine that will do that. So I'm not going to do it by hand. So I replicated the quilt block setup. So it had an interfacing on the back of it because it was done with red work. And then I sewed the seam and I pressed it to one side, as we would do with quilting. And then I stitched this first part. And I don't know if you can see it that well on the camera, but this first part is actually quite rippled along both sides. So just that width of stitch was not, the fabric was not stable enough to support that. So I added a piece of tearaway to this section of it. And now I think if I put a little bit of a shadow on that, maybe that you can see, but the stitching here is 100% flat. And over here, there is a lot of ripples. So tearaway stabilizer is not just for machine embroidery. It works with your decorative stitches as well. Okay. Now, in this case, you're probably going to say, well, that's great, but that's a very open stitch. And how would I remove the stabilizer from the back of that? And so what I would do is I am going to just fold this back against the stitching. And then I would take a pair of my scissors. Oh, I have them here okay. But I would use a pair of applique scissors, and I would just cut the excess away. So there would be a little bit of tearaway stabilizer that would remain in the bottom of that. Okay. So tearaway stabilizer, as I said, the way you're going to remove it is just tear it away. Or in this case, I'm cutting it because of the openness of those stitches, and I don't want to pull them as I tear that stabilizer away. All right. Okay. So and tearaway is probably one of the stabilizers that we would use for a good part of what we're working with. So quilt blocks, tote bags, like I said, anything that's actually going to be hidden inside, and little bits of paper are going to stay, and we're okay with that. So that's predominantly where I will use the tearaway stabilizer. Now we also have a cutaway stabilizer. And let me just have to grab the right things here. And a cutaway stabilizer is something that is going to remain. Sorry, I'm just moving things in front of the camera here. So a cutaway stabilizer is something that's going to remain in the project. So here is a knit sweater, and this required a stabilizer that is going to stay in the project. Okay, so this is a stretchy knit sweater. And if I didn't put stabilizer in there, when it gets washed, it's just literally going to ripple. Okay, and it's not going to look pretty. It won't lie flat, and it just won't be pretty. So if we have a peek at the inside, you can see that I have used a cutaway stabilizer, and I removed the excess around the outside, but I kept the stabilizer on the inside because I wanted that entire design to be stabilized and to maintain its integrity. Okay, so that is really important. This is fairly soft, so it's soft against your skin, but we do have a stabilizer called, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget the name of it. It's a whisper, no. anyway, there is another product that we
whisper web or no-show mesh.
no, but I think it's called soft fuse, I think is what it's called. Anyways, there is another one that if this is good, if you have somebody has very sensitive skin, that you can just fuse it over top of this, and then that will get rid of any of those sharp edges. But personally, I don't have any issues with that, but for somebody who does, so you want to keep that in there, and then you're good. Okay, but so this sweater has been washed, and it is as nice as the day that it was embroidered. So that is why you want to have a cutaway in your work. Okay. Now, we also have, and for any of you that are doing these projects in the hoop these days, and so there's a lot of mug rugs floating around and quilt blocks and so on, and that is the pattern designers or the digitizers are requesting that people put or use a cutaway stabilizer like the whisper web, which is what this is here. This is a layer of whisper web. So this is going to be what I will hoop, is simply this stabilizer. And then this particular project is a project in, I found it on the MySewnet library, and it is like a little trivet. Okay, so it's like a little trivet, and I've got my Thinsel Bright here that's going to, because it makes it into like a little hot pad. And this stabilizer, this cutaway or this whisper mesh is going to stay in the project. So when I'm finished with it, I will literally just cut around, and both the Thinsulite and the stabilizer will stay in the project. It just adds extra stability. And then there you can see the back of the project. Okay. Now, when we are going to trim, there are a lot of scissors, and there are duck bills as well, which I don't have a pair of them right handy, but there are a number of different scissors that you can get. We've got some nice fine tip ones here. We also have the bent handled ones. The duck bill also has a bent handle on them, which is really, really amazing, so that you can trim your project in the hoop. Now, one of the things that a lot of people have this, we have a hoop position on, I think most of the machines, and it says that's the trim position. Personally, I like to take my hoop off the embroidery arm and trim it on a flat table, never on your knee, but on a flat table. And the scissors that have the bent handle on them will allow you to get into the hoop and trim really nicely away. These ones have a nice fine cut all the way to the point. These ones, though, they're not necessarily an applique trimming scissor, but what I love about them is that they are very, very thin at the point, and they are very sharp. So when I first saw these scissors, I thought, you know what, these scissors just look a little bit wimpy. But when I tried them, I'm in love with these scissors. And so if I'm working with cutting a flower applique, and I need to get right into the, into the little tiny notches so that I can get rid of all the excess, so that my stitch, my satin stitching will cover it, then these are the ones that I want to use. So they are perfect scissors for going in and getting those little points. So, scissors are very important for doing applique. And when you're going to use your cutaway stabilizer, as in that sweater, then I would have used a pair of these scissors or a combination thereof. But you want to be very careful when you're doing that you don't cut I don't cut the garment. So in this case here, as I was trimming away, I was very careful, and I used my duckbill scissors to help prevent cutting the actual garment. So that is a very, very important point. Okay. All right. Now on this little project here, this little mat, what I will be doing with that is just cutting it with my rotary cutter, and just cutting it 1/4 of an inch beyond, and then putting a binding on it. So I'm not even going to have to use scissors, or I could use scissors. Or freehand it with a rotary cutter or scissors, doesn't matter. But you're going to freehand cut that one, and that stabilizer will stay inside. And when you wash this, I'm not going to have any issues with it. Okay. All right. So that is the cutaway stabilizer. Now I'm going to talk next about the water-soluble stabilizer. Okay, because water-soluble stabilizer is probably one of my most favorite stabilizers to use. And so I was making this design, which I had found in the MySewnet library, which is online. And it started off as one little crochet motif. So it looks like crochet, but it's done with machine embroidery. So I put it into my hoop and I had the whole thing, let it go, monochromatic and so on. And everything is great. And I had my water-soluble stabilizer in it. And when I was done, I ran to the sink and I started to rinse it and nothing happened. Why? Because this is actually a whisper mesh cutaway stabilizer, not a water-soluble stabilizer. So the reason that I show this is because it is very important with any of your stabilizers. They come in a roll and you really need to keep the labels on them. So for instance, here is well, let me just find one here's a tearaway stabilizer, for instance, and on the label, there is a little symbol. You can see where they're sort of tearing that stabilizer away. This is a tearaway. It's also marked on this label. So it is very important that when this plastic wrap comes off, you take that label and you stick it inside the roll or somehow, but you do not want to get your stabilizers mixed up, as I did in this case. And this is what happens when you're in a rush and you go, everything is good. And then you put the wrong stabilizer in and you think, how many stitches did I do? And it didn't give me the effect that I wanted. So I redid it using a water-soluble stabilizer, and this is what I got. So it's absolutely beautiful and just goes to show that you must make sure that you use the correct stabilizer. Okay. Now, as I said, the water-soluble stabilizer is one of my favorite ones, and we have that here in a package. And so the packaging on these has a little water drop on that. So that means that this stabilizer will dissolve in water. And I have a little sample here. Now, my water is cool, okay? So it's not going to just dissolve immediately, but all I have to do is to just put that stabilizer in. And now this, like I said, it's not warm. It needs to be a little bit warm water, and it's literally just going to dissolve. So we're going to put that in there and we'll just let it sit for a little bit, and it's literally dissolving in that water. And that's how you remove the stabilizers from your projects with water soluble. Okay, now where would we use water soluble? I like to use water soluble for any place that I'm going to see the back of the design. Okay, so here's a denim jacket. And this is a nice, loose, open design. And you know what's going to happen when you're going to go to an event, or you're going to go shopping, or you're going to go for friends for lunch, and you're going to put your jacket, and they're all going to be admiring it. Put your jacket on the side of the, on the back of your chair. And then people are going to say, I got to go and look at the inside and see what it looks like. So this was an instance where if I had to put a tearaway on the back, I would have little bits of paper. If I had to put a cutaway, I would see all that cutaway stabilizer on the back. So I used a water-soluble stabilizer. So the inside of this jacket looks as nice as the outside. So this was a perfect match. When it was done, all I had to do was to rinse it, and it disappeared. All the stabilizer was gone. Now, what I would have done first is I would have just taken and removed all the excess stabilizer, because I don't need to wash all that. It sort of goops up a little bit. So I would take that out. Okay, so removing the stabilizer as much as possible so that you're only left with a little bit on the inside, and that's going to be fine. The other place that I use the water-soluble stabilizer is when I'm making, as I said, two-sided design. So here we have a purchased placemat. So this was a placemat that I bought at the dollar store just to practice on. And I wanted the back, I wanted it to be two-sided. So the other side is, made from a brown fabric. I was not going to take it apart. So this is where I put a matching thread in the bobbin. So, green thread, 40 weight thread on the top, green 40 weight thread in the bobbin, put it into, use water soluble stabilizer, and that's the back. Both sides are equally beautiful. And I actually don't remember which I stitched on top and which was the bottom. That's how nicely it was done. So it is a great way to do that. And the same when I was working with this little trivet, I had put a water soluble stabilizer in it because it's going to be a two-sided. So when it got washed, or rinsed in this case, there's no stabilizer that is left. Okay. All right. The last one that I'm going to talk about is, another reason for using a water-soluble stabilizer. So, and this is just a little sample similar to that sweater. This is actually polar fleece, but it's a fabric with a nap. Now, when you have a fabric with a nap, what is going to happen is that if you don't put something on top, your stitching is going to just sink right into the nap. So this is what it will look like. So you can see here on this is a terry cloth. And over here, the stitches look pretty messy, not really nice at all. And over here, the stitches look quite nice. They're sitting on top of the nap. The difference is using one of our water-soluble stabilizers that we call a topper. So this is called Waterworks. And what you would do is you would put a stabilizer in the bottom or on the back of the terry cloth, and we'll talk about that one in a second. And then before I start stitching, I would cut a piece and put it on top, and I can use my based around design or based around hoop. And so this is going to protect the stitches from falling into the nap. Okay, so very important when you're working with anything that has a pile on it or a nap. So polar fleece, terry cloth, even knit fabric sometimes. You don't want the stitches to fall into the nap. You want to put them on top like so. All right, so that is called a topper, and it is a water-soluble product as well. Now the last one, and I'm hoping I have a sample in my box here. Yep, just have to dig deep for it. Okay, so the last one that I'm going to talk about. So we've talked about tearaway, talked about cutaway, we've talked about water soluble. The last one that I wanted to mention is a heat product. So this is removed by heat. And we have one, it's called Clear and Melt. I will confess I have not used it a lot, but the way that you remove it is with the heat of an iron. So if you have one of these little irons, the Singer Memento irons, it's actually made for our digital cutter, the Memento, but it is great because you're just going to use the heat of that and just lightly hover over it, and it's going to remove this stabilizer. So if you were working with something like velvet or something that couldn't be washed with the water soluble, taking it with heat would be great. And just one little tip I'm going to give you before we're going to stop for questions is terry cloth seems to be one of the items that has probably changed the most as far as how do you stabilize it. Okay. It has gone, I remember back in the day that we were using tearaway, and then we were using cutaway, and then we were using water soluble, and we were using sticky and all kinds of stuff like that. But a lot of those products just failed. They didn't do a very good job. But if you use a clear and melt, what happens is because your stabilizer will only be removed with heat, it will not remove with water. So if you want to keep a stabilizer in your terry cloth, use a clear and melt as the main stabilizer on the back, and then use your Waterworks on the top, and that is going to give you a nice looking towel where the images don't sink into it. Okay. All right. We better stop for questions because I have a couple of other things, and I know we're going to run out of time as usual.
It happens.
Yeah.
Somebody is wanting to know what happens to the cutaway stabilizer when it gets washed.
Okay. So that cutaway stabilizer, now we have two different kinds. We have this one here that's on the back of the sweater that really is almost like a fabric. Okay. So this has been washed, and it's a little hard to see on the camera, but it just gets crinkly. It just looks like a cotton fabric that hasn't been ironed. But that's on the back, but on the front, it looks okay. So that cutaway stabilizer just stays in, and it's not going to go anywhere. Now, it doesn't have stretch. So in that area where the design is and the cutaway is, there is no stretch in that area. It is not a stretchy product. Whereas up here, I have stretch in the sweater. So I wouldn't put it on a great big expanse of a knit because the stretch would disappear.
And that's actually a nice tie into the next question. Somebody wants to know if you could use a water-soluble stabilizer when embroidering on a sweatshirt?
Ooh, okay. So if you used a water soluble on a sweatshirt, what would happen is when you wash it, that stabilizer would disappear. So if the stitches are quite dense, the knit itself might not be strong enough in order to support it, and it will start to curl and to roll. What I would suggest is trying a clear and melt instead of a water soluble, because it's going to stay in unless you iron your sweatshirt. So I would say the clear and melt would be better than a water soluble, because that stabilizer will remain in the garment, whereas a water soluble will disappear. Again, density is probably going to play a factor in that. And I would do a little test, buy yourself some sweatshirt material and do a test and see what stabilizer is going to work the best.
Okay, still a couple more here.
Okay.
Somebody is wondering if the glue from water-soluble stabilizer could cause a problem in your drain, in your pipes.
Okay, so, and that is a really, really good question. So if I have my, a big roll of the water soluble stabilizer, let's say on the back of this, obviously I wouldn't take that and just throw the whole thing into the washing machine or, into my sink. I would remove as much of it as I can. It's sort of a plasticky base, this one, so it will perforate out, or you can cut it away. And if it is huge, and let's say that you're living in the country, so some people are on a septic system and so on, I would probably then maybe rinse it in a bucket, and I could then just put it in my garden or something like that, rather than putting it down the drain, if it is a huge piece that you have done, for sure, because it does become gummy kind of, or sticky a little bit. So yeah.
And I can see another question here. Somebody wants to know, what would the best stabilizer be to make patches?
Oh boy. Okay. So for patches, I would probably use a cutaway, because I want that patch to be somewhat sturdy, and the cutaway would remain in the patch. And as long as the patch is going to be attached to something, or if it's going to have a backing on it, then again, I would put just going to get this little sample here. But if I were making a patch and I had, my image on the front fabric, and then I'm going to put a different thing on the back because it's a standalone patch, then I would be putting a cutaway inside, because I want it to help stabilize the patch. So I would be using a cutaway in that.
And someone has a question about twin needles, how to avoid them breaking. She said using decorative twin needle for decorative stitches, and they broke. Any ideas how to avoid that, or what could have happened?
Okay. So one of the things that you have to watch for, because just even in regular situation with needles, is what is the thread path? You want to make sure that the thread path is clear from the thread spool right down to the needle. And now when you're working with a twin needle, you actually have two threads that you have to worry about. So you want to make sure that they are absolutely no obstruction all the way down. And I would probably slow down my stitching so that I'm not stitching at high speed, whether I'm in embroidery mode or in decorative mode, because it is a little more delicate. And you absolutely want to make sure that you have accounted for you want to use your decorative stitch plate, of course. In an embroidery, mostly use our single stitch plate, but you would want to use your decorative stitch plate, and just make sure that you have not exceeded the width that you are able to. A lot of the higher end machines today have a safety feature on them that will not allow you to exceed that, but some of them may not. And so you want to be careful with that.
And somebody's wondering if you remember the name of the design that's on that denim jacket.
Oh boy. You know what? It is a design that I pulled from the MySewnet library. I do not remember. I believe it's part of a floral collection. I am not sure what it is. I'm not good at writing that stuff down. So, okay. All right. So quickly, because I know we're going to run out of time here, but I wanted to share with you how to hoop fabric, because I think it's very important to understand how to hoop fabric. And so what we have here, the hoops that I'm using today, these are the hoops that come with the Designer Quartz 29. So we have here, this is the 100 by 100 by 170 hoop. And we also have the 100 by 100 hoop. And both of them are traditional hoops with an inner and an outer part to them. Okay. And the other hoop that you are able to use on that machine is the, let me just get it here, is the spring hoop. So this is the one that not a lot of people are familiar with. It's been around for a while. It is a 40 by 40. And so it has a little spring that you would put your fabric on the inside. Now, whenever you're working with a design, you want to try to go for the smallest size of hoop for the design that you are working with. So if you're working with a design that's only 10 millimeters by 10 millimeters, I would not put it into this big of a hoop because I'm, using excess amounts of stabilizer. I'm having to hoop a large portion of the fabric. So I want to go with the smallest hoop possible. So let's just look very briefly at this. So I have an inner hoop. I have an outer hoop here. I'm going to take a piece of stabilizer. I'm just using a piece of tearaway today. And then I would take my fabric and put it in here. Now my fabric will probably have reference lines and everything on it. I don't have reference lines on this. I'm just going to hoop it. But one thing that you want to be careful of, and I tried this earlier and I couldn't, you can't see it on the camera, but at the bottom of this hoop, there is a little arrow. And that's on the inner hoop. And on the bottom of the outer hoop, there is an arrow. And it is important that those two arrows match up. Okay. You have to have them match up or your hoop, you may run into trouble with your embroidery. So we are going to put our two items like that. And then I like to start in the top and hoop the top part. Then I will hoop the bottom left. And then finally put it into the corner where the clip is. And you can see the clip on the underside there. You want to make sure you're probably going to have to loosen that a little bit so that you can get in and fit that fabric and the stabilizer in there. If there's a little bit, in the past, we used to everything had to be hooped 100% flat. We don't do that anymore. So if there's a little bit of give in there, that's okay. If you feel there's a little bit too much, you can just give it a little gentle tug, but you do not want to stretch the grain of the fabric out of kilter, because the minute that you take it out of the hoop, then you're going to run into difficulty. Okay. So that is how you are going to hoop that on a traditional hoop. Now I'm going to just unhoop that, take that fabric out. You've probably heard, or you will hear about people who float designs or float their fabric instead of putting it into the hoop. Let's say that it's velvet or my denim jacket. I'm not able to hoop that denim jacket because of all the bulk of the seams. So what I will do is I'm going to hoop the stabilizer, and then I would take my item, and let's say that it is now I wouldn't use the stabilizer with this fabric. It's just what I happen to have handy, but I am going to take terry cloth. Now this is a very thick, fluffy terry cloth. And for me to put that into the hoop would be next to impossible. So I am going to float it on top in the right position, and I can baste around the design. And then I would lastly put before I baste in the design, I would put my topper on there, and then I would be able to baste around it, and I'm good to go. Okay. So this is what floating means. I have not put my fabric in the hoop, only my stabilizer is in the hoop. And a lot of times when you do machine embroidery applique, that's what's happened is they tell you to put your cutaway or your whisper mesh in the hoop, and then you start to build your applique block on top of it. Okay. The last hoop that I want to share with you today, because I do want to talk a little bit about the Designer Quartz 29, and this is a metal hoop. Now the metal hoop does not work on the Designer Quartz 29. Okay. I'm just showing it to you because it's a different hooping method. These hoops will come with magnets, and the surface of this is got a little bit of a nap on it, which helps when you're hooping so that your fabric is not going to slide off of it. So I store the magnets on the reverse side of the hoop where it is shiny so that they don't crush the nap on the right side. So I'm just going to remove those. We're going to put this here, and we'll take a piece of stabilizer. And again, I'm using the tearaway, but honestly, you could use any, this could be any stabilizer. It could be a water soluble, it could be cutaway, it could be whatever. These metal hoops are a single part hoop. So there's not an inner and an outer, there's just the one. All right, I'm going to take my stabilizer and place it on top like so. And then if I were hooping, let's say this face cloth, then I could put that on. And obviously I have to match the registration lines. There are little notches on the bottom of this, ridge notches down here, which will help you determine where those should be. And then I would place my magnets in the appropriate spot, like so. And then my towel is hooped and I'm ready to go. Well, I would put my topper on, sorry. With that, I would put my topper on and then put my magnets on. So just know that the metal hoops are easy, but they still have, you still have to know how to hoop your fabric. But just in case you're wondering, like, what does floating mean? Now you know what floating is. Okay. All right. So before we move over and have a quick peek at the machine, because I know we are running short of time, are there any questions?
Somebody is wondering if there is a ruler or something with the hoops to help you with placement.
Okay, so you can get a template. I never even thought about that, but there is a plastic template that you can get that has a grid. And whenever you are creating a design or you purchase a design, what I like to do is I will take it into our MySewnet embroidery software, and you can get a free design, the basic version, which is free, and print out a template so that you know where the vertical and horizontal centers are. And then those vertical and horizontal centers will be matched to the vertical and horizontal centers, which are these little raised notches, or they are the notches on the inner side of the hoop. So yes, there is a plastic template that you can get for all of the hoops. I think even the metal hoops have that template. So yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
I don't see any other questions. Nope.
Okay, perfect. So before we pop over to the Designer Quartz 29, there's one thing that I want to say. This, if you are new or you have been around with your machine for a little while, all of the machines come with a user's guide. And I hate to say, but so many people do not read the user's guide. So if you would just humor me for 1 second, there are 2 important pages of any user's guide that you need to look at. And the first one is your embroidery edit overview. What this will show you is a picture of every icon that's on that screen, and it will tell you over here what that is. And then if you go on further pages, it will tell you how those things work. That is one of the critical things. If you don't know what those icons are, you're going to be in trouble. And then if we go over here, the other thing that we have, the second screen, is the embroidery stitch out screen. So again, there is a different set of icons on that page. And if you don't know what those icons are, you're going to be in trouble. And it will give you all those information here, as well as, what they mean. So 2 important things that you can help yourself and do a lot of learning is by going in and having a look at those. So before we move over, because again, we're really running out of time. So if you're going to give me like 2 more minutes, this is a design that I created in the Designer Quartz. I created this right on the embroidery edit screen, and it was simple to do. Okay, so let's pop over and have a peek at that screen. So we're just going to wake the screen up over here. And so again, by knowing what all these icons mean, it's going to allow me to make any kind of changes that I want, or to create a design. Now, I have a lot of designs that are, I forget what the number is, but there are designs that are internal to the Designer Quartz, and we see those right down here on the bottom, and I can scroll through those designs and see which ones they are. I can go into the sampler, the MySewnet app, and I could get pictures of everything that's in here. So we're just going to pick, well, there we've got a flower in there already. I can also bring in fonts. So there are 10 fonts that are built into the Designer Quartz 29. And by opening or selecting one of those, a keyboard pops up, which allows me to type anything in that I would like. Oops, I'm not very good at spelling from a distance. So let's just bring this up like so. And we'll select OK. Once I have my text in there, it gives me some editing options. So if I want to put that on a curved envelope, I have an option. Bring that in. I'm going to select OK. And that brings it into this screen. Now you'll notice that the flower that I had is now gone. So if I go up here and select multi, back to a design, that allows me to have 2 designs in my screen, and I can move them around. Okay. Now, the other thing that I absolutely love about the Designer Quartz 29 is the fact that once it is connected to the router in my house and to my MySewnet account, I can go into the MySewnet library, and I'm doing this live, and I can now select the designs in there. Now, what I did earlier, because it's going to give me all the designs. Now, if you remember, I said that the hoop is 100 by 170. So obviously a lot of designs would not work. So I had gone in earlier and filtered down the size so that only the sizes that would fit in this machine would actually come up on the screen. So if I picked this one, let's say, I want to open it, takes a few minutes, and that design downloaded as quick as that from the MySewnet library right into the screen of the Designer Quartz 29. And then I could add lettering to it. I could do whatever I want to it, but it will give me all of that information. So by understanding the icons here, the icons along here, and each one of them will open up and give you more information. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with the Designer Quartz 29. I was actually really impressed when I started to play with it. I thought, wow, this machine for its price point does a lot of stuff. It has some of the bells and whistles that, the top of the line, the Designer Epic 3 has. It's a pretty amazing machine. So that is, I don't have time to stitch anything out, but it does have, there's the little embroidery arm, and this embroidery unit will just pop off, and there's a little accessory box that fits on. So it's a great, as I said, secondary machine. You're going to a retreat, you're going to an embroidery class. It does have a lot of really nice bells and whistles in it for your designs. All right. So do we have any questions about that? I know we're a few minutes over. Any questions?
Really, there was only one thing that I want. Well, okay, two quick questions.
Okay.
So we know that the size limitation on the Quartz 29 is 170 by 100. Do you know if there is a stitch count limitation on it at all?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know what? I do not know if there is a stitch count restriction on it. I have not exceeded it.
Right.
But yeah, so I do not know the answer to that question.
We'll look that up and see if we can find out and come back and pop it into the chat.
Okay.
And the other question is, someone says that she is well, it is in there. When you're looking at the list of hoops, there's one called unknown. Do you know the reason why you get that unknown when you go in there? The person asking the question was wondering if that meant that you could use a different hoop. I mean, she specifically asked about the 180 by 130, which we know doesn't fit. It's a little bit too big. But do you know what that unknown means on there?
You know what? I don't. I had actually not come across that in my in my exploration. So I am not sure. It may well be that it's a placeholder, that there might be a hoop that, we have the spring hoop, the 40 by 40. And sometimes when the programmers do things, they put placeholders in. And so maybe that is a placeholder for something that, and it just maybe did not get removed during the process of changing things.
Those are all the questions that I see.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I guess that is it then for today. So I just want to thank all of you so much for stopping by and, listening to a little introduction on machine embroidery. So hopefully everybody has learned at least one thing from today. And all I can say is, go in and check with your Husqvarna Viking dealer and see what they have for, embroidery machines or stabilizers, needles and threads. Just remember, the combination of needles and threads is really, really important. So if you're having trouble, that's probably what's going to cause your issue. And don't forget to experiment. Thank you so much.